am so honored to be here with your pastors, just awesome people, and what an awesome place this is, man. I just walked in, I can feel victory in the house tonight.
For decades, Joel Osteen stood among the most recognizable pastors in America, drawing massive crowds with messages of hope and encouragement. But in recent years, a series of controversies, public backlash, and shocking tragedies have placed his ministry under growing scrutiny. As criticism intensified and difficult questions continued to surface, many began wondering whether the reputation he spent years building could survive. Has Joel Osteen reached a turning point, or is there more to the story than most people realize? The growing storm around Joel Osteen. Joel Osteen seemed almost impossible to criticize. Week after week, he stood before packed crowds, delivering uplifting messages that reached millions of people across television broadcasts, books, and social media. His positive approach to preaching helped transform him into one of the most recognizable religious figures in the world. To supporters, he represented hope during difficult times. To many others, he appeared to have mastered the formula for success. But as his influence continued to expand, so did the scrutiny surrounding him. The larger Lakewood Church became, the more attention people paid to what happened behind the scenes. Questions that once circulated quietly among critics gradually found their way into national headlines. Discussions about the church's finances, its enormous reach, and Osteen's personal wealth became increasingly difficult to ignore. What had once been isolated criticisms slowly evolved into a much larger conversation. Then came a series of events that intensified public attention even further. A devastating tragedy inside Lakewood Church shocked worshipers and attracted national media coverage. Long-standing debates about transparency resurfaced. Reports involving a surprising discovery of cash hidden within a wall inside the church generated widespread speculation online. Although separate incidents, together they fueled growing curiosity about one of America's most famous ministries. At the same time, social media dramatically changed the way public figures were judged. Every statement, interview, and decision could be examined by millions within minutes. For Joel Osteen, that meant every controversy carried a much longer life than it might have in previous decades. Supporters defended him passionately, pointing to the countless people inspired by his message. Critics, however, argued that important questions were still being left unanswered. The divide only grew wider. To followers, Osteen remained a pastor focused on encouraging people through life's struggles. To detractors, his carefully optimistic image began to feel increasingly disconnected from the hardships many ordinary people faced. The debate was no longer centered on a single controversy or headline. It had become a broader discussion about leadership, accountability, and the responsibilities that come with enormous influence. Yet perhaps the most fascinating part of the story is that Joel Osteen never originally planned to become a preacher at all. Long before the sold-out arenas, best-selling books, and worldwide recognition, he worked quietly behind the scenes, avoiding the spotlight that would eventually define his life. And when a sudden family tragedy changed everything, few could have predicted that he would become one of the most influential and controversial religious figures of his generation. The reluctant heir of a growing church. Long before becoming the face of Joel Osteen, his life inside Lakewood Church looked very different from what most people would imagine. While his father, John Osteen, stood confidently in the pulpit delivering sermons to growing crowds, Joel stayed behind the scenes. His role was not preaching, but production, working on television broadcasts, editing sermons, and helping expand the church's media presence far beyond Houston. For years, that behind-the-scenes work felt like his comfort zone. Unlike his father, Joel had no strong desire to become a public speaker. In fact, he often avoided stepping into the spotlight altogether. Public preaching made him uncomfortable, and he doubted whether he could ever match the presence or confidence of his father. So, while Lakewood continued to grow, Joel focused on the technical side of ministry rather than the spiritual leadership in front of the congregation. But change was slowly approaching, whether he was ready or not. As Lakewood Church expanded its reach into television and international audiences, Joel Osteen repeatedly encouraged his son to take a more active preaching role. Joel resisted for years, unsure of himself and convinced that his strengths were better suited behind the camera. Still, the pressure from within the family and the growing demands of the ministry began to build quietly in the background. Then everything shifted in 1999. Joel Osteen's health suddenly declined, forcing urgent conversations about the future of the church. With the ministry at a turning point, Joel finally agreed to deliver his first sermon. It was a moment filled with emotion and uncertainty. Standing before thousands inside Lakewood Church, he reportedly wore one of his father's jackets, almost as if borrowing strength from the man who built everything before him. Unbeknownst to many in the audience, John was listening from a hospital bed. Only days after that first sermon, Joel Osteen passed away, leaving behind a leadership vacuum that changed everything overnight. Joel, once the quiet producer, suddenly found himself leading one of the fastest-growing churches in America. The transition was not planned, and many questioned whether he was truly ready to take on such a massive responsibility. At first, he struggled to step fully into his father's style. But instead of continuing fiery, traditional preaching, Joel gradually developed a different voice, one centered on encouragement, optimism, and personal belief. That shift would soon define his entire ministry and reshape Lakewood into something far larger than before. Crowds began growing rapidly. The church eventually moved into the former Houston Rockets arena, transforming it into a massive worship center capable of holding tens of thousands. His reach expanded globally through television and best-selling books, turning him into a household name far beyond church walls. But with that rise came something he could not avoid: attention. And with attention came questions that would soon grow far louder in the years ahead, leading into a new wave of scrutiny that would challenge everything about his success. And that's where the real pressure began to surface. The image beneath the millions. As the influence of Joel Osteen continued to expand, so did the attention surrounding his financial success. What began as a local ministry under Lakewood Church had transformed into a global brand, reaching millions through televised sermons, best-selling books, and large-scale speaking engagements. To many supporters, this growth reflected divine favor and disciplined leadership. But to critics, it raised increasingly uncomfortable questions. By the mid-2000s, discussions about money and ministry became impossible to ignore. In 2005, Joel Osteen made a highly publicized decision to step away from receiving a salary from Lakewood Church. Instead, his income would come from book sales, media deals, and speaking appearances. While some viewed this as a transparent and ethical move, it also intensified curiosity about just how much revenue was flowing outside traditional church structures. His books alone became massive commercial successes, turning him into one of the most financially successful religious authors in the world. With fame came a new identity. Joel Osteen was no longer viewed solely as a pastor. He had become a public figure, a motivational voice, and for many, a celebrity preacher. Estimates of his personal wealth circulated widely online, with some reports suggesting figures approaching tens of millions of dollars. Although exact numbers were never fully confirmed, the perception of extreme wealth became part of his public image. That perception grew stronger after reports about his Houston residence surfaced. His home in the River Oaks area, one of the most affluent neighborhoods in the city, was described as a multi-million-dollar estate, with luxury features that sparked widespread debate online. For supporters, it was simply a reflection of success. For critics, it became symbolic of a growing divide between the church's image and its financial reality. At the same time, scrutiny around Lakewood's finances continued to build. As a religious nonprofit, the church was not required to disclose full financial records publicly, which led to ongoing speculation and criticism from watchdog groups. Questions were raised about how donations were allocated and how much was directed toward charitable outreach compared to operational and leadership expenses. Although the church consistently defended its practices, the lack of transparency fueled ongoing debate. Additional controversy followed the Osteen family as well. Victoria Osteen, Joel's wife, was involved in a widely reported incident during a flight in 2005 that led to legal disputes and media attention. While the case was eventually resolved in her favor, it added another layer of public scrutiny to the family's already high-profile image. Meanwhile, theological criticism also intensified. Some religious leaders accused Joel of promoting a prosperity-centered message, arguing that his teachings placed too much emphasis on success and personal achievement, while downplaying suffering, sacrifice, and deeper doctrinal themes. Still, through every wave of criticism, Joel maintained his calm, optimistic delivery. But that steady image would soon be tested in a way far beyond financial debates or theological arguments. Because a major national disaster was about to shift everything and place Lakewood Church at the center of a storm the world would not forget. The moment the church faced the nation. Houston was overwhelmed by one of the most devastating natural disasters in modern American history in August 2017. Hurricane Harvey unleashed catastrophic flooding across neighborhoods, leaving thousands of families stranded, displaced, and desperate for immediate shelter and relief. Streets turned into rivers, homes were submerged, and entire communities were forced to evacuate with almost no warning. As the crisis escalated, public attention turned toward major institutions across the city, especially places of worship and large facilities capable of housing evacuees. Among them was Lakewood Church, one of the largest megachurches in the United States and the home of Joel Osteen. At first, the church announced that its facility was not accessible due to flooding concerns, particularly in surrounding areas and parking structures. That statement was initially accepted by some observers. However, within hours, social media began circulating images and videos suggesting that parts of the building appeared dry and potentially usable. That contrast between the official statement and online visuals quickly ignited public outrage. What followed was an explosion of criticism. People began questioning why such a massive, well-resourced church had not immediately opened its doors to shelter displaced residents. As water levels continued to rise across Houston, frustration grew louder. Online platforms amplified every claim, every video, and every opinion. Hashtags calling out the church and its leadership began trending, and the situation escalated from a local issue into a national controversy. The criticism was not just about logistics. It became symbolic. To many observers, Lakewood Church represented more than just a building. With its 16,000-seat capacity and global recognition, it was seen as a potential refuge during a moment of widespread suffering. The expectation was simple. When disaster strikes, institutions with power and space should act quickly, and when that expectation was not immediately met, public perception shifted sharply. As pressure mounted, Joel Osteen and the church responded, explaining that Lakewood had never refused assistance and that safety concerns, including flooding in nearby access points, had influenced early decisions. They also stated that the church had already been used as a distribution center for supplies and relief efforts. Soon after, Lakewood officially opened its doors to evacuees, eventually sheltering hundreds of displaced residents. But by that point, the narrative had already taken shape. Critics argued that the response came too late, pointing out that in moments of crisis, timing is everything. Comparisons began circulating online, especially highlighting local businessman Mattress Mac, who had quickly opened his furniture stores to flood victims and actively assisted rescue efforts. For many, he became a symbol of immediate action, while Lakewood became associated with hesitation. The situation escalated further after Joel Osteen addressed the media. In several interviews, he defended the church's actions and suggested that early online criticism exaggerated the situation. While his explanations were accepted by some, others felt disconnected from the reality experienced by those trapped in flooded homes. What started as a disaster response issue soon evolved into something deeper. Questions about leadership, responsibility, and public expectation. And just when it seemed the controversy surrounding Lakewood Church had reached its peak, an even darker and more tragic event would soon unfold inside its walls, one that would shift the conversation from criticism to shock, fear, and national grief. Inside the most shocking moment in Lakewood's history. Lakewood Church was filled with thousands of worshipers expecting a typical Sunday service on February 11th, 2024. Music, prayer, and Joel Osteen's uplifting message were meant to define the day. Instead, the congregation found itself caught in a sudden and terrifying situation that transformed the atmosphere into one of fear, confusion, and chaos. Reports confirmed that a woman later identified as 36-year-old Janice Yvonne Moreno entered the church during the transition between English and Spanish services. She was reportedly armed with an AR-15 style rifle and other weapons concealed with her belongings. At first, there was no immediate sign of danger, just an ordinary flow of people moving between services. Then everything changed within seconds. Gunfire erupted inside the building. Panic spread rapidly across the massive church complex as attendees scrambled for safety. Families ducked under seats, parents shielded children, and crowds rushed toward exits while trying to understand what was happening. The scale of Lakewood Church, which usually symbolizes unity and worship, suddenly became a maze of fear and survival. Witnesses later described a chaotic and surreal scene, with some recalling the shooter moving through the area while shouting phrases such as, "Stay calm, all I need is help." The combination of confusion and urgency made the situation even more difficult for those trying to escape. However, what could have escalated into a far greater tragedy was quickly stopped. Two off-duty officers working security at the church responded immediately. Houston Police Department officer Christopher Moreno and Texas Alcoholic Beverage Commission agent Adrienne Herrera engaged the shooter and fatally stopped the attack within moments. Their rapid response is widely credited with preventing mass casualties inside one of the largest megachurches in the United States. Even though the shooter was neutralized, the aftermath revealed a heartbreaking detail that intensified the tragedy. Her 7-year-old son, Samuel Moreno Carranza, had been with her inside the church. During the shooting, he was critically injured by a gunshot wound to the head. Emergency responders rushed him to Texas Children's Hospital, where doctors performed multiple emergency procedures in an attempt to save his life. His condition remained extremely critical, Medical reports later confirmed that Samuel underwent several brain surgeries, suffered severe neurological damage, and experienced repeated cardiac arrests during treatment. Doctors warned that even if he survived, his recovery would be permanently life-altering. Another attendee, a 57-year-old man, was also injured but survived after receiving medical care. As investigators reviewed the case, disturbing background details emerged. Moreno reportedly had a documented history of severe mental illness, including schizophrenia, and had undergone previous psychiatric interventions. Despite these warning signs, she had legally obtained the firearm used in the attack months earlier, raising renewed national debate about mental health systems and firearm regulations. In the aftermath, Joel Osteen addressed the media visibly shaken. Known for his composed and optimistic demeanor, he appeared visibly affected, acknowledging the trauma experienced by the church community and expressing gratitude that the situation was not even worse. But while the immediate danger had passed, the emotional impact was only beginning. Because what followed inside Lakewood Church was not just recovery, it was a deeper reckoning with fear, safety, and faith itself. And in the days that followed, the church would enter a new and painful chapter that would challenge everything it stood for, leading into a moment that would change the atmosphere of Lakewood Church forever. Picking up the pieces after the tragedy. The days following the shooting at Lakewood Church were filled with a heavy sense of grief and uncertainty. The vibrant sanctuary that had once echoed with songs of worship and messages of hope now felt unusually quiet. Beyond the physical incident, the event deeply impacted the congregation's sense of safety and peace. The most heartbreaking focus remained on 7-year-old Samuel Moreno Carranza, the child of the shooter. Despite the efforts of medical teams at Texas Children's Hospital, his condition stayed critical. Multiple surgeries were performed in an attempt to save his life, but the injuries were severe and life-altering, leaving doctors uncertain about any meaningful recovery. His situation became one of the most devastating human elements of the entire tragedy. Another injured churchgoer survived, but the emotional impact lingered deeply among witnesses and members who were present that day. Many described ongoing fear, confusion, and trauma, even after the physical danger had passed. As investigations continued, authorities confirmed the shooter's documented history of mental illness, including schizophrenia, along with prior psychiatric treatment. The fact that she had still been able to legally obtain a firearm reignited national debates about mental health systems, prevention gaps, and public safety laws. Inside the church, recovery efforts began immediately. Counseling sessions, prayer gatherings, and emotional support programs were organized for members struggling to process what had happened. Security protocols were also reviewed as leadership worked to restore a sense of safety without losing the openness the church was known for. For Joel Osteen, the moment marked something deeper than controversy or criticism. It was a direct confrontation with vulnerability inside a space built on hope and faith. And as Lakewood Church slowly tried to rebuild its sense of normalcy, one question lingered in the air. How does a place known for preaching hope move forward after experiencing fear at its very core? Because after everything that had happened, nothing inside Lakewood Church would ever feel the same again. Thank you for watching. If you found this story insightful, make sure to subscribe, like, and turn on notifications for more deep dives into real-life events and powerful figures. See you in the next video.